Hello, everybody. It's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I am shifting things up a little bit. I had planned for another episode of Master of Command, but there was some news yesterday that was released about a game that I've been anticipating, and I think a lot of us have been predicting, but was officially announced yesterday, I believe, on Black Friday. And that is a new game by the folks behind Grand Tactician. The company is the Grand Engineer Corps, but they announced their sequel to Grand Tactician: The Civil War, which is a game we played on this channel a lot. And as you can guess by the trailer footage in front of you, that upcoming game is Grand Tactician: Napoleonic Wars, 1792 to 1815. So starts before sort of Napoleon's the ruler of France, and kind of the revolutionary period into the Napoleonic Wars. They've released about a minute-long trailer here, which looks pretty good. Certainly better than Grand Tactician: The Civil War did. And that's not shade at Grand Tactician: The Civil War or anything. So yeah, I think a lot of us have been predicting, hey, they're probably going to do a Napoleonic War game next. They had been teasing over on their website a number of developer blogs. First off, they announced that they were working on a new game. Then they announced, they were going to be reworking the way that battlefields worked. So if you're familiar with Grand Tactician: The Civil War, they had, I don't remember the exact number, maybe it was like 15 different battlefields that were recreated, attempting to be historical battlefields, right? Bull Run, Gettysburg, Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, Shiloh, I think was there. And the way that it worked is if you were fighting in an area that was loosely tied to Bull Run or Gettysburg or Antietam, then, the way that, just taking a step back, this game took place, American Civil War, took place over the course of the American Civil War on a grand strategy map, and as units moved and collided, then you'd fight a battle in tactical formation. And if you were fighting in an area that was kind of close to Bull Run, well, then you'd be thrown onto the historical Bull Run map. If you were fighting a battle that was at Gettysburg, you'd be thrown onto the historical Gettysburg map. And then they had some sort of filler maps as well. So you might also end up at sort of a fictional made up map, but that was very limiting. They sort of handcrafted these maps. The art style, I think, for the atlas view of the maps was brilliant. But it got very samey when units moved around. So, what they announced in one of their first dev blogs was, hey, we're not going to actually be crafting individual. This was my interpretation of this. They're not going to be crafting necessarily all the historical maps they did before. It sounds to me, and I don't think they use the word procedural, but basically the blog post is unlimited battlefields. So I assume they're going to be doing some kind of procedurally generated campaign so that they can have more maps, so you don't end up with like a 20th version of, Bull Run, if you will. Now, this is just sort of a remark on, hey, these are the types of things they've been talking about in their dev blogs, and they announced Grand Tactician: The Napoleonic Wars yesterday. Now, what are they saying about Grand Tactician: Napoleonic Wars? Not a lot yet. This is from the Steam page. Napoleonic Wars is the second title in the Grand Tactician series of historical real-time strategy games. The French Revolution has put Europe in turmoil, sparking an era of warfare in an unprecedented scale. Play historical campaigns of the Revolution and Napoleonic Wars, from a single theater focus to campaigns to a European-wide grand campaign as one of the main belligerents. Manage your nation through political, diplomatic, and military means. Recruit, upkeep, and send operations. Great armies of infantry, cavalry, and artillery, and choose the best officer to lead your men. Support operations that consistent flow of supplies and make war feed war. Or make war feed war. The other information, they don't have a lot else on the Steam page here, but it says historically detailed campaigns from Napoleon's Italian campaign to the 100 Days, playable nations with different objectives, capabilities, and military organizations, epic battles, and one-to-one scale taking place in battlefields generated from topography of the exact locations or forces engaged, military management where organization, doctrine, command and control, leadership, supplies, and drill all play important roles. Detailed battlefield simulations include orders delivered by couriers, fog of war, weather, visual conditions, deep morale and cohesion systems, and historical units of infantry, cavalry, and artillery, all with their detailed formations and tactics. Will you become a master of Europe? That is all they have shared so far. So we don't know a lot. It doesn't say anything about multiplayer, so I'm assuming this will be a single player only game as the previous one was. Interestingly enough, in one of their dev blogs, they had mentioned that they were had partnered with a publisher, and I see no reference to any publisher yet. That obviously could be coming later, but they indicated in like their first dev blog that the fact that they were working on a new game that, you know, they had basically signed with a publisher, an unnamed publisher. So again, that could come later. There's no indication of a date for when this will be ready either. So, you know, this, I assume, is not coming out this year. I would assume late next year at the earliest, but who knows? I don't think they announced Grand Tactician: The Civil War dramatically ahead of when the game went released. They don't have a history of like announcing a game 5 years before it comes out. So I assume, you know, the fact that they've been working on this for a couple of years now, that that we're a little bit further along in the lines. The first of their dev blogs was from January of this year, but they had teased that they were working on a new battle or a new game earlier. That was teased all the way back in November 18th of, or was it, doesn't, they don't post the year, but it was definitely not this year. It was November 18th of last year. So they have now, that was a year ago since they announced this. I assume since Whiskey and Lemon, which was their DLC for the Civil War game, which came out in August of 23, that they've been working on this for at least 2 years. Which isn't a really long time when I say that for a game like this. That could take a much longer amount of time. I don't know. But I think, you know, it's interesting. I don't know what else to say other than I have some reservations. Their Civil War game was kind of the only game I've ever played like it, right? Where you have a grand strategy map. You manage logistics, you manage raising troops, you manage organizing your order of battle, and then you fight battles on a tactical map. And it was in the true Civil War scale. It had a lot of problems. It was very broken on release in many ways. The AI and the strategy map was terrible, and the battlefield wasn't much better. They made a number of patches and enhancements over the years that the game was out, and it did better over time, but it still has that jank to it. They're a very small team, or they were. We don't know anything about the new sort of structure, but they were a very small team at the time, and it was like, you guys are trying to do a game that would be difficult for Creative Assembly to do well. They probably have the resources, though. It would be difficult for Paradox to do well. They probably would have the resources for it. But you guys had, like, for Civil War, it was like 6 guys. It was like really like a core team of like 4 or 5 people. And we actually did an interview with them. I believe it was for the Single Malt Strategy podcast, you know, several years back. And it was like, it was an incredibly ambitious effort, and they did a really good job around putting a framework around it. But it was just like one of those things where it came to optimization, where it came to AI performance, where it came to artwork. Like, you could tell this was not a AAA game, which is totally fine. I love this game. I'm just saying it had issues. And the reason I bring that up is because Napoleonic Wars are big, and they are much larger than the Civil War. And the Civil War game, for all its pros and cons, did not have to worry about diplomacy. There was no scenario where you had to worry about, you know, I guess maybe Europe could come in. I don't know that I ever saw that happen, but I think that could happen. But you didn't have to worry about like peace treaties. You didn't have to worry about reshaping Europe. And so I'm really curious what they mean by having a European-wide grand campaign. I'm really curious what they mean by, you know, having diplomatic, you know, and political actions in this game, because the Napoleonic game, the Napoleonic era, is an entirely different beast when it comes to, you know, all the different coalitions that got stood up, all the different peace treaties that were made. Are you going to model all of that? Because what I would assume would be the easy way to go about it is what they hint at of doing a single campaign playthrough, right? Maybe instead of worrying about creating coalitions, each campaign is just a campaign of a coalition. And when certain victory conditions are made, then the campaign ends. And you don't have to worry about the peace treaty because that war of the coalition is over. However, if this is a game that is going to have diplomacy and politics in it in a meaningful sense, and if it is a game that has a European-wide grand campaign, I am very curious what that looks like. I am very apprehensive. The amount of work they need to do to this game to support Napoleonic scale, the amount of work they need to do to this game to support the very different tactical layouts. You know, the armies of the Civil War were sort of trained on Napoleonic levels or grounds, but they didn't form squares. Cavalry was a scouting arm at best. Melee theoretically could occur, but that's, you know, it wasn't the decisive actor on the field that it became. Artillery was very different, although not dramatically so from a, you know, gameplay representation standpoint. But, you know, there's a lot of changes, and I went through this a little bit myself when I helped out on Scourge of War Waterloo and some of the work that had to be done to transition Scourge of War Gettysburg and the Civil War games to Napoleonics. And that was a pretty simple approach because it was one battle. There were no politics. It was a battle that hinged on a number of sort of fortified areas, which was also a very challenging aspect to representing those types of conflicts. I don't remember Civil War having soldiers being able to occupy buildings, but that's a huge part of the Napoleonic Wars in a way that wasn't really as relevant outside of a handful of instances in the Civil War. So I'm just saying there's a lot of work to do here. And I'm really excited about this, but I hope that they put as much effort into refining and fixing the AI and getting the AI to where it needs to be and getting the AI updated to the new tactics. And then I'll also add, I hope there's no reference of it. I hope there's an element of the RPG that the game ended with Whiskey and Lemons. I think that was kind of a mixed bag in terms of how that DLC was received for American Civil War. But that was a DLC where they're like, actually, you are one specific general, and you're going to get to role play your general as they rise through the ranks. And I know some folks feel that kind of broke the game, and the DLC wasn't totally finished. And I've seen a couple of comments from posters about this since this new game has been announced. But I really like the element of you are an individual officer and now role play your rise. And I can think of no better instance of being able to do that in Napoleon's armies, right? Rise from the ranks of a brigadier to become one of his marshals, and maybe you'd even get an opportunity to be his nay, you know, in the later campaigns where you're de facto commanding the army. I think that would be a really cool element of this, or even rise to the preeminence of Napoleon or of the Duke of Wellington. So, you know, I think that could be a really cool element. Maybe that'll be a DLC down the road, but they don't reference any of that. They don't reference any of the DLC or command as an individual soldier. The closest they get to it is like assigning officers to armies, and you know, whatnot. So I guess we'll see. I've been rambling for almost 15 minutes here on a game that we have 1 minute of trailer and 1 paragraph of explanation and 1 paragraph of features. So we don't know a lot yet. It seems early days. I would guess we've got at least a year until this thing comes out. But, you know, I could be wrong. I'm excited about this. I think this definitely will rise into one of my most anticipated lists. I'm leery of doing something announced in November as a most anticipated for 2026, but I will say I don't think they announced Civil War too far ahead of release. So if they're doing anything based on what they've done before, I would think maybe this is further along than we know, and maybe we've got a chance of this coming out next year. But 2026 on the outside, 2027 is a probably safer guess, but we'll see. I'm very excited about this either way. I fully anticipate spending money, buying this game, having things that frustrate me and drive me mad about it, but eventually it turning into a gem, kind of the way the last game did, even though it's still rough around the edges. I also really am curious about the publisher element. Like, I really find the business side of the gameplay interesting. So the fact that they announced they had an unannounced publisher and then they announced the game without the publisher, either that means the game is not as far along and the publisher doesn't want to be tied to it yet, or maybe something happened, but we don't really know. That's all speculation. The last we know is they said they had an unannounced publisher, and then they announced the game without listing a publisher. Which usually, like, the publisher would be the one spearheading the game announcement. Again, unless it's maybe further along, or sorry, not as far along as I think, and maybe the publisher doesn't want to be putting their marketing effort behind it quite yet. I don't know. We'll see. I'm just going in circles now. I'm talking a lot. But yeah, I'm excited. I want to know your guys' thoughts. This was 16 minutes. It probably could have been 5. But definitely leave your thoughts down in the chat. And with that being said, that's going to do it for today's video. We will pick up tomorrow again with another of Master of Command video. And then I think on Monday we'll switch over. Well, maybe we'll do 2 more Master Command videos because that'll wrap the series up. And then we'll switch over to the Strategic Command Concert of Europe sponsored stream and episodes on that game. But that's enough of that. Thank you guys for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.